It can't be emphasized enough how important the Sabbath is to Jewish identity. In Jesus' day, Jews encouraged one another to enjoy a day of delight, worshiping God, laying aside ordinary work, and fighting only in self-defense. And as we see in our gospel text, for the ultra-scrupulous Jew, not plucking grain on the Sabbath was a way of ensuring that the holy day wasn't profaned. It's easy for 21st century Christians to dismiss the fourth of the Ten Commandments as irrelevant. We'll go along with commandments like not stealing, not cheating on our partner, and not murdering. We see the value in not lying and in honoring our parents, but keeping the Sabbath. In a world where a person needs to hold down 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to make ends meet, the idea of setting aside a whole day without pay isn't feasible. And after all, most of us no longer live in an agrarian society with its seasonal rhythms of existence, but instead in a society of 24/7 multitasking in order to achieve, accomplish, perform, and possess. And we call it progress. When Moses delivered the commandments to the people at Mount Sinai, they were commanded to remember. Remember that once they were slaves in the land of Egypt, but they have been delivered from slavery. Again, irrelevant, we say. We imagine ourselves as free to do as we choose. But to claim that we aren't slaves is laughable. We are slaves to anxiety, to deadlines, to our jobs, and to the addictive consumption of news, information, and more of the stuff that advertisers insist will make us better, healthier, happier, and more beautiful. Yes, we are indeed slaves, and we have not experienced any sort of deliverance. We are enslaved to the needs and desires that leave us endlessly restless, inadequate, and unfulfilled. Not only is the fourth commandment more relevant than ever in the rat race of a world in which we live, it very well may be the most urgent of the Ten Commandments, and very possibly the most difficult of the commandments to obey. But somehow, some way, we need to figure out how to carve out the time and space in our lives to remember what's important in life and to be thankful for it. To spend more than an hour each week worshiping God. To let go of our habits of anxiety and greed and resentment and embrace an attitude of love and care for our neighbor. I'm not going to try and tell you which day of the week the Sabbath should be for you. Traditionally, it falls on Saturday for our Jewish siblings and on Sunday for most Christians. But Sunday is a work day for me that usually doesn't end until anywhere between 7 and 9 p.m. So I have to find another day for my Sabbath. Maybe you do too. I'm not going to tell you how long your Sabbath should last. It lasts from sundown on Friday until Saturday's sunset for Jews. And unfortunately for many Christians, it only stretches from 11 a.m. until noon on Sundays. But if we make an effort, I'm betting we can pause longer than 1 hour out of the week's 186 hours. I'm not going to tell you what your Sabbath should look like. For many people, mowing the lawn on Sunday may fall into the category of the kind of work that's prohibited by the commandment. But for White-collar workers doing manual labor on the Sabbath, something so different from how they work the rest of the week, can be a way to remember that God has given them a physical body and a calling to be connected to the earth. But what I would like to share with you is a perspective about the Sabbath that you may not have considered. And that is Sabbath as resistance. We know that a culture that demands so much from our spirits is not healthy. We know it slowly wears us down until there's no more left to our souls. Our weariness gives testimony to our enslavement, and we wish there was an alternative. Well, there is an alternative. It's called the Sabbath. When we incorporate the Sabbath into our week, we are resisting anxiety. Bible scholar Walter Brueggemann reminds us that God rested on the seventh day. God didn't show up to do more work, but instead left the office. God didn't come and check on creation in a fit of anxiety to be sure it was all working. This then becomes a model for each of us who have been made in the image of God. It's no wonder that Jesus invited his disciples out of the anxiety system when he encouraged them to look to the lilies of the field and the birds of the air as examples of creations that have let go of their anxiety. When we have too many thoughts and worries crammed inside our heads, occasionally taking a break from them can be helpful. That's what we do on our Sabbath day. We let go of our worries temporarily so we can use the time to focus on God and God's goodness, which all too frequently has taken a back seat in our lives. So Sabbath becomes an act of resistance against anxiety. The Sabbath is also an act of resistance against coercion. Our culture coerces us into a dog-eat-dog mentality. But it doesn't have to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way. God never intended for it to be that way. Sabbath is the one day that breaks the pattern of coercion. It's the day we remember that we are of equal worth and equal value. The commandment puts us all on equal footing when it says that not only you, but your children, your workers, immigrants, and even your animals must pause each week to reimagine a social life away from coercion and competition and toward a compassionate way of living, one that is in solidarity with one another. And finally, Sabbath is an act of resistance against multitasking. We are a society that lifts up multitasking because we place such high value on productivity. The more you can do, the better, we say. In fact, we've become so good at it that it has become a way of life. Just look at the person talking on their cell phone as they complete their transaction with the store clerk or the bank teller, or the one listening to their favorite podcast or audiobook while they maneuver their way through traffic, or check out the person during worship with their eyes glued to their phone or Kindle reader. The prophet Isaiah condemns the people of Israel for going through the motions of worship while their minds are set on other things. Like those ancient people, Sabbath has become for many of us a fake occasion, an official act of work stoppage, but shot through with anxiety and less than Christian attitudes toward others, not to mention an opportunity for catching up on news headlines, downloaded novels, and social media right before worship begins, and sometimes even during worship, instead of considering how God is at work in the world and in our lives. We rush off almost before the final amen because we've got things to do, by golly, and you better not get in our way. If we kept the Sabbath, if we really and truly paused and considered the ways of God, there would be less anxiety in our lives, less competition, less division within ourselves. Sabbath is a way of resisting those things that creep into our existence. Keeping the Sabbath is not easy. In fact, I have slipped away from it. I've convinced myself that there's so much work to do and not enough time in the day to do it all. But for me, it's time to reorient myself towards the God who is good and always working toward redemption. And keeping the Sabbath is one way of doing that. If you've fallen into the trap of consumerism or the trap of believing the world will collapse without you, then maybe it's time for you to reorient yourself toward a God of love too. May God bless us all in our acts of resistance as we shift our focus onto the one who loves us and wants the best for us. Amen.